Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Mark Marquette. So glad you joined us today to stay curious. Beside me is one of our outstanding docents, Eric Baker. Hi, Eric.
Hello.
Good to see you. Eric was a test project engineer, otherwise known in NASA vernacular as a TPE, and you're a contractor with Rockwell. Do you work all 30 years of the program, Eric?
Till the program I was there for 30 years from 1980 to 2010. We still had three launches to go, but my supervisor and myself, we took the 2010 layoff
Uh huh.
and allowed it to some of the younger guys to keep working. But I started docenting immediately.
Well, he is part of our shuttle legacy for sure. Eric's a great guy. We've had his sister on, and your sister's
Husband,
yeah. Tell me her name.
Rick,
I'm having
Perry Horner,
yeah, Perry Horner, and her husband
Rick.
Rick Horner have been on. Both outstanding. Your sister Perry is a CM configuration management, and Google that because really interesting aspect. She could stop the launch just because of the paperwork, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, if the paperwork wasn't right, there'd be no launch. And yeah, so say hi to your sister Perry for us, and Rick, her husband there. Rick, you might be watching. Maybe they're both watching. You ought to be. All right, because Eric approached me a while back and said, Mark, did you know what October 18th is?
Well, October 19th,
19th, okay.
because it's interesting because I was doing some reading on Robert Goddard, and in the Wikipedia article, it talks about the fact that his father had always encouraged his scientific activities, and in the late 1800s, he read War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. And at one point, he was doing some work on the farm and he was up a cherry tree trimming out some dead branches. And he looked out from that height of that large cherry tree, and that's where he, in his later writings, was inspired to try to figure out a way to get higher, to get a higher perspective. You know, how far could he see if he could actually go to Mars?
Hmm.
And that he used October 19th as his inspiration day. And that was, as it turns out, the reason I brought it up to you is October 19th, which is tomorrow, is my birthday.
Yeah, all right.
So it's,
And you're inspired.
and now I'm even more inspired.
And that was 1899, and he remembered this day throughout his life, did he
Yes,
not? It was
yes, he
it was the
did.
day where he smoked a cigarette, I'm sure, because he died of throat cancer, but he may have had a hot toddy or whatever. That's the
Well,
right.
he was only 17 years old at the time. So,
Okay, we're going to get into all that
yeah.
here in just a second, as we want to tell you one of our sponsors, gohistorytravel.org. There's not a lot on that. It's a very unique travel blog that is done by the Ramanujan family there. And there they are presenting me a check for $1,000
Ooh.
to support our museum. This is not the only time they've done that. That's Barat, the son on the left, and Mal in the middle, and Ram. I keep in touch with them. They're now in Vienna. They go around the world and take a unique perspective, folks, on in their little newsletter about things that you see. In fact, we're going to share the exact spot where Robert Goddard launched his first rocket in Auburn, Massachusetts, and it's not exactly a place that you can drive up and take your picture beside. We'll tease you about that, so stay curious about that. But the Ramanujans, thank you for all your love of the museum, and we certainly love you to the full moon and back, like everybody's been looking at there. And they will be they're going to support a couple astronauts at Shuttle Fest this year also, so becoming very important uh, financial supporters of our museum, and we need people like this to step up so we can do beautiful things. I see Steve Jokums is watching. He says hello to everyone here, including Eric and Marty. And we also have with us John Graham. John is looking over Marty's shoulder, and his wife Samantha Graham of Space Coast Sam. She had a huge following of over 2,000 people watched her program. Go check that out. And that's because she has spina bifida. And John, you locked us into that group of people. And your beautiful wife gave. I really enjoyed our conversation with her. She's written she has a sloth that is called Sam that does stuff on the Space Coast. So John Graham is going to hopefully help us out in the future and give Marty some breaks on the Streamlabs program that we're doing here. John Borelli's up there in Michigan. He says he's up in New York, I'm sorry, and he's ready to learn. And Dean Babcock says good afternoon. And Tom UCX there and Carlton Bailey. He says the launch for the Starlink tonight is 7:31 p.m. 40% go for launch. I think them winds are giving them a fit, aren't they, Eric?
Yeah, that's winds aloft is always very important because when you hit the jet stream, it can really play havoc with your guidance and control.
I would say, and move things around a little bit there. So, to brag about Eric, like so many of our space workers here, he is up at Space View Park in the shuttle area there. There's Eric's name at the top. Marty's out there. So many of you that worked the shuttle era, as well as the Apollo, Gemini, and Mercury, have their names out there. This was a fundraiser 15, 20 years ago. Took $100 from you, Eric, to put your name up there. I work for Newsweek magazine. I wish they would send us $100 and we'll put your name on the side of 444 Madison Avenue. But this is how unique these people are. They're special in a way of they've done things that no other part of society does, putting things in outer space. And Eric, I'd certainly be very proud of that. Looking back, you've been retired a few years. How does it feel to be part of that great shuttle era?
It was the best job in the world. I'd been following the space program down in Miami, where I was raised, from Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. And when I was in my brother and I, even if you talk to any rocket engineer, anybody who works on the space program, a very large proportion of them did model rocketry.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother and I went so far as we made our own gunpowder. You could still go down to the local drugstore and buy potassium nitrate, which is the main thing it's hard to find because that's your oxidizer. And but we did research. But all the engineers, a lot of them did. Some of them went so far as to do liquid rockets.
Yeah.
We had
not the Estes solid rockets.
No, they we had one of our test conductors had a doer of locks, in his garage.
Huh.
So we were always cutting edge in that respect.
Well, and I know you're enjoying your retirement. He's a great docent. If you come here, what you usually do Mondays?
Monday afternoons.
Yep. And if you come in and hit that tour, you'll learn a lot from somebody that did put stuff in space, not a space geek like me. Here's another picture of you there that we used in there with your shuttle there. And that he's been on the show a couple times. This was the COVID days when we started getting without our masks and stuff on there. You got the same shirt on today. Yep. I think your sister did that.
She made that
for you, didn't she?
Me,
Perry made that for you. That's a beautiful pattern there. Well, we of course want to throw a little bit of fall in the air. Thank you, Bill Whiting is up in Michigan, up in the Lansing area, I believe. That's certainly
Detroit.
Pardon me?
I think Detroit.
Troy?
Detroit.
Oh, Detroit. Okay. Detroit, Lansing's somewhere up in there. That team up north, or that state up north, because I'm from Ohio. But beautiful foliage.
He's there.
Yeah, he's in yeah, he's close to Detroit, dual citizen. I don't know if you ever remember Bill. You met Bill Whiting. He's kind of tall, and he's a snowbird, but he's not down here right now. But great guy, dual citizenship in Canada, and a great space geek. And we miss you down here helping us out, but we know what you're doing up there is more important. But beautiful, uh, getting some peak leaves up there. I do miss this. I showed it to Anita Truex, our office manager, Bill, and she said, "Tell Bill we don't get that kind of color on palm trees down here." And no, we certainly don't. So those of you missing it, there it is. Those of you that see it, send us a picture and I'll put it up there. Well, there's a cherry tree, the kind that inspired Robert Goddard. I had a big cherry tree growing up in our backyard. And those are some of my fondest memories, getting up there in the big old crook of a tree and leaning back and just gouging myself with those delicious cherries up there in Northwest Ohio that cost nothing back in the days. We were all free range kids up there, and basically lunch was eating off fruit trees in the neighbor yard, peaches, apples, cherries, even some rhubarb growing in the floor or ground we'd chew up there. Well, I'm going to let Gary or Eric do most of the talking. Of course, I'll interject there, but this is the man, Robert Goddard. He was a genius, and just so many anecdotes about him. But he died in 1945 of cancer, and had he lived, you know, 10 more years, he certainly would have orbited something around the Earth in the early 50s. Don't you think?
The It's hard to say because he had so little financial support. Uh, there were four theoreticians: uh, Russian Tilikovsky, Hermann Oberth in Germany, a Frenchman whose name I cannot remember, Pedelbur or something like that, who actually did a lot of uh, groundbreaking aviation work in addition to his rocket stuff. But those four basically did the math that said that you could build a rocket and go to outer space. Goddard was the most prolific of the tinkerers. He was a physicist, he was an experimenter, and he would patent his work. He started very early on writing in notebooks everything that he was doing. And in 1907, he had his first article published by Scientific American. And so let's see, if he would have been about in his 20s. And it was basically an article about using gyroscopes to stabilize aircraft in flight.
Got a picture of him doing a gyroscope.
So he was already doing all of that work. And in 1912, he independently developed the rocket equations that Tilikovsky had done a decade before, but they didn't have the
communication. Yeah.
But he got his first patents in 1914, and those were for a multi-stage rocket and then a rocket using solid or liquid propellants. But he was teaching at a university up in Massachusetts, and he was doing experiments there. And one of the things that he discovered was that solid propellant rockets were extremely inefficient. And he was basically concerned with how much of the heat energy was actually going to thrust. And it was something on the order of 2%, which is just abysmally low. And he started experimenting and measuring and trying to figure out, how he could improve that. And one of the major things he did come up with was in the steam generation for turbines and such like that, they use what's called a convergent divergent nozzle. And he put one of those and it's called the Laval nozzle,
The
and
what nozzle?
de Laval,
De Laval.
and by putting it on a solid rocket engine, he was able to get the efficiency from 2% up to 40%, and then eventually 63%. So he was doing just groundbreaking work,
So, yeah.
but he he was not able to get any government interest. Even during World War One, he approached the Army and the Navy saying, what can I do to help? The war effort. He actually, him and a colleague at his university came up with basically what became the bazooka
Oh, really?
as a solid
Weapon.
propellant rocket with a warhead. The war ended before it could, be finished. His coworker eventually continued the work, and it was developed in World War II when they added the shaped charge to the head. But he could never get any real government support. In let's see, in 1915, he verified that a rocket did not need air to push against in order to operate. He built an experiment at the university. I think it's Clark University.
Yes, Clark University, where he taught.
And he
A graduate of.
he was able to verify that not only would a rocket work in a vacuum, it actually works better. If you look at any of the rocket engines nowadays, if you have the same rocket engine like the Merlin engine on the Falcon 9, the second stage has a more efficient version of the Merlin engine because its nozzle is optimized to work in a vacuum.
Okay.
The air around it is the exhaust goes supersonic. You have to make the nozzles stronger to keep them from collapsing because the air pressure goes down as it goes faster.
Did not know that.
So
Very interesting.
It's critical that you get those shapes correct, and he did that work.
Mm-hmm.
He also did. He got his very first government funding from the Smithsonian, and that was in 1917 for his basic research. And some of his colleagues were amazed that the Smithsonian gave him money for rockets because rockets were crazy. That's Buck Rogers and H.G. Wells and all those guys. But when they published his landmark paper on methods to reaching extreme altitude, it was like a 65-page document, of which in the last page or so, there's like 8 lines that talks about getting to a high enough altitude and with the correct, he said there is nothing stopping the science from sending a rocket to the moon. Well, that one little section caused the press at the time just to vilify him and call him a crackpot and a crazy person. And he had nothing whatsoever to do with the press ever again because they took things out of context. And he was always didn't have really great health, and he just didn't have time to suffer fools.
Yeah, he did. In fact, well, I'll let me show a couple of slides here that may jump around in there to emphasize. We have a paver out there at Spaceview Park that commemorates Goddard. We love that. Here is a 1924. His first rocket was launched in 29, I believe, right?
The first
27.
liquid 26.
Yeah, 26. So hopes to reach the moon with a giant rocket, and they basically laughed at him. The New York Times even said that a rocket could not operate in the vacuum of space. Any high schooler student knows that. In fact, they criticized him, saying he didn't have the intelligence that's ladled out in high school classes in there. Really rubbed the wrong way. They corrected that on January 13th, 1920. It said that Professor Goddard and his chair at Clark College did not know the relation of the action to reaction and of the need to have something better than a vacuum, against which, of course, he'd be absurd. Of course, he only seems to lack the knowledge ladled out daily in high schools. I mean, they printed a correction to that. Guess when?
I believe it was in 79.
No,
No.
it was July, the day that Apollo 11 came
Oh.
back, 1969, when Apollo
Okay.
11 landed. And I forget, of course, it launched the 16th, so I guess it was the 26th, somewhere in there. They printed a retraction on there. Of course, there's not the famous picture of you, but he's lighting the rocket at the top there with sort of a Bunsen burner
Yeah.
apparatus at the top there.
Blowtorch.
Blowtorch. We're going to see a couple little pictures of that. There he is, the bald gentleman there. That's why you like him so much,
Must be.
my friend. With his buddies there, just the stories those guys. These are the world's rocket pioneers right there. I do not know the names of those gentlemen, but they should be inscribed in the annals of space history somewhere.
Well, he had a team that he worked with when he finally got some really big money in the 1930s with the help of Charles Lindbergh.
Yep. We're going to see some pictures of his
Yeah.
team at the first rocket launch out
and
there
they,
at,
in Roswell, New Mexico.
of all places.
That
It all
became-
started in Roswell, New Mexico. July 24th, Marty's saying, is when Apollo 11 came back, 1969, and that's when New York Times, the print of record, finally sucked it in and said, yep, they were wrong. This is the manuscript that you mentioned, has sold for $75,000 at Christie's and other art auction places. So if you got one of these Steve Jokums on your shelf there, hang on to it. And just wanted to show you where it all started, okay? As we talk more about it, some of these might be a little out of sequence, but this is Auburn, Massachusetts, okay?
Aunt Effie's farm.
Effie's farm. It is today at the Pocatchog Golf Course on the 9th fairway. So you can't drive up to it and have a picture. You probably got to buy green fees to go look at it. But and the Ramanujans took these pictures. They noted on their little blog of their Go History Travel that Werner von Braun wanted to see this exact spot where the great Goddard had launched the first liquid fueled rocket, because you tell the story what von Braun said to the scientists that once he started working with him about his knowledge.
Well, they asked him, where did you get your initial information? And he looked at him like they were cretins. He says, Goddard, he was your scientist.
Yeah.
And
in the 1920s, he had
Yeah.
this figured out. And,
Yeah.
And we created the V2 rocket off of his patents.
And in the Wikipedia article, it talks about the fact that Goddard was able to look at a V2, and he looked at it and says, this is my rocket.
Really?
Because it used gyroscopes for in-flight control. It used vanes in the exhaust of the rocket for steering, which he had invented.
Uh-huh.
He used gas pressurization to move the propellants before they, got into really good turbine pumps. He had to design and build his own turbines and the gas generators for them. So every single one of the rockets that were being built after he passed away were Goddard rockets.
Well, von Braun asked Goddard's widow, who took the famous picture that you see of the first flight. And there's a little recreation. I'm going to show you that from a movie. He wanted to see the first sight of the launching of history's first liquid propelled rocket by the visionary teacher 31 years earlier. This was, of course, so was 57 that he visited the site of this March 16th, 1926, world's first liquid fuel rocket. Finding no historical marker there, von Braun began a campaign that evening to erect a proper one. His efforts through the American Rocket Society succeeded with the 1960 dedication of the memorial at this site in Auburn, Massachusetts, 6 miles from Worcester, Robert Goddard's birthplace and hometown. He also studied and later worked at the Clark University, which is also in Worcester. U.S. President John Adams came from the Worcester College, studied law there, and the first Women's Rights Convention was held in 1950 at Worcester, attended by 1,000 women. So it's a very famous place up in the Massachusetts area there. And I think I got another picture of it there, site of the world's first rocket launch. And that would not be there, perhaps, if not for Wernher von Braun's interest in who he considered the father of rocketry. And thank you, Go History Travel, for the Ramanujan family for posting that up there. Like I said, we love our monuments out at Spaceview Park in downtown Titusville, just 3 blocks from where Eric and I are sitting, and we're just a mere 9 miles away from the rocket pads across the river. And there you see the paver right off of Eric's shoulder. There's other pavers. We actually celebrate the Chinese rocketry in a paver out there. So we love that. Marty and I love any chance to talk about Goddard. We want people to know that he was something that was a very unique individual and way ahead of his time. And there you see why you see this contraption. Basically, the wires just to support it. It's 2:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, March 16th, 1926. His wife took that photograph, and here's a movie documentary recreation of that day there. So the flapper era in the 20s there. Marty's got a question of the day that we're going to throw out at you and answer at the end. We're also going to talk a little bit about STS-34 and STS-58. Both launched today. In both, I'm going to throw a question out there, Marty, I'll answer. Who was the astronaut on 34 and 38 that went to the Mir space station? Who was launched on the same, twice on this same day? But that's my question. Marty, you've got a good one there.
Okay, George Abbey, excuse me, George Abbey only notified one future astronaut that he was not initially selected as an astronaut. Actually, he only notified one person. Everybody else who was not selected was notified by other people. For example, Jay Honeycutt. So, who did George Abbey notify that he was not selected?
And you read that in a book you're reading called what?
First Six.
First Six.
First Six. It's First Six women astronauts.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like for you to share that with me. I'd love to read that. And Mr. Jay Honeycutt, of course, great friend of our museum, been on the show. He was the guy that told him you weren't in there, except Abby did it one time. And Mr. Abbey just passed away about 4 or 5 months ago, and he and Mr. Honeycutt, very, very close friends. And so mull that over, okay? And we appreciate. We're going to answer that at the end of the show here. So, speaking of gyroscopes, there is the great Goddard playing with a gyroscope and showing how he can maneuver on a barber chair around by tilting it. This is a standard science thing at most science museums.
Well, plus any boy or girl that had a bicycle, they would change out the inner tubes. I did it. My brother did it, and you would sit there and hold the axle and spin it, and then see if you could move it.
Yeah.
And that was the gyroscopic effect of of, by that spinning mass did not want to move. And when you put it into a rocket or an airplane, it gave you a basis for control. It would, if the rocket deviated from its where you wanted it to go, the forces on the framework around the gyroscope would send signals down to those control vanes or the fins and would correct the flight.
And I'm looking on your shirt. I don't see it. There's a very famous orbiting telescope that works on the gyros.
The Hubble.
Yes, yes. It has no thrusters because the fumes of the thrusters might mess the mirror up over time in the vicinity. So they figured out the gyroscopes, and that's what's going to fail on Hubble. That'll finally be its demise.
Yeah.
Down there. But they're down to like the last
two.
Yeah, they could actually run it on one. There were 6, I believe, in the beginning. Yeah. And this is what the astronauts swapped out. But of course, the last mission was 15 years ago, I think, up there, 125. Here is, look at the early rocketry. There's the first mobile rocket platform there.
That's a crawler transporter there.
That's your crawler transporter there. Indeed. I don't know if that exists anywhere or not, but there's one of his rockets. Look at, they even had a gantry. And you can see the guy on the bottom left and so forth. This is 100 years ago, folks, in the 1920s. All right.
Well, that one right there, that's a little bit later. That's in the 30s.
Okay.
Because when they got to Roswell, they launched about 35 rockets between 1930 and 1941.
All right. And that's where they did it.
And even if they were, only a partial success or even a complete failure, because he learned something from each and every one of them, he didn't consider them a failure at all. Goddard was very similar to the Wright brothers in the fact that they did so much basic research. The Frenchman, who was also doing some of the early rocket work, he also he was the one basically that invented the aileron to replace wing warping that the Wright brothers created. And by learning something new every time they did something, it's what SpaceX is doing right now. SpaceX has the funding. He can blow up rockets as often as he needs to, but you don't do it just to blow them up. You learn what works and what doesn't.
And that's also the way the early rocketry at the Rocket Ranch was, with your Atlas rockets blowing up left and right. But the old timers that you and I miss, like Murphy Wardman and Jack Martin, they said that they always knew what went wrong, and usually it never happened again. Something down the line may have messed up from that on there. Marty, you got a comment or question?
I don't know if it's a comment or a question. Probably a question. Eric, you know what he's looking at in that picture?
What's he looking at in that picture?
Yeah.
Well, there's a gantry down at the bottom.
Well, that's the first LCC, Launch Control Center. Look at that buttons he's got. He's got the button in his hand to launch it there in the left hand, and wires going down. What do you think, Marty?
Well, he's looking at a pressure gauge. When it hits a certain pressure, which I have no idea what that is, then he will launch.
Okay. All right. Good. Good. What a great shot of Goddard there. We've got Happy Friday, Bill Whiting. You see your picture behind us here. Thanks for sending them. Tom Celentano. Nick Sedler likes my comment about free-range kids.
Yeah.
That's what we were, brother, right?
Oh, yeah.
You left the house on a Saturday. Hell, I would go 2 miles. I'd go downtown to the theater, 50 cents for a double feature, come back. That was like 10-mile round trip on the bike. Mom didn't even tell, what'd you do today? We went and saw the thing, or the Blob at the Harris Theater,
Feature in a cartoon.
Yeah, a feature in a cartoon, too. So thank you for being a faithful watcher there, Nick. JPFL 142 says happy Friday, everyone. Not sure who that is. Neil 1040, he got the right date on Apollo 11 landing. You get a lot of gray hair, Neil. That's my excuse. I don't have to. I can zero in on the about now on some of this stuff.
Now, you said the user ID was JPL.
Yeah,
It's interesting that
JPFL 142.
well, JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, one of the reasons, and that's at Caltech, reason it does not have rocket in its name
Yeah,
is because of that press, terrible publicity that Goddard had to suffer through. That MIT didn't want to do any rocket research. At Caltech, they wanted to do it, but they knew not to use the word rocket. That's why it says jet.
Is that right? Well,
And-
now you're staying curious. That's awesome, Harry. I never heard that before. Did you, Marty? I believe it. That's awesome.
Good trivia question.
Yeah, good trivia question. Here is, what come up, come down.
Yep.
They're out there in the desert of Roswell, New Mexico. There's just another UFO they're dragging in from the desert there. But I believe that's Goddard on the right. He always wore kind of a big brimmed hat. The fedora was in vogue. Here's a little production photos that you may or may not have seen. I mean, we're not going to use cranes for leverage. We're just going to put the old Bill up there on the scaffold and let's send it up to him, man.
Couldn't afford a crane.
Yeah, couldn't afford a crane. That's right. I mean, the money, he was lucky that Lindbergh helped him. Lindbergh, of course, sympathized with him is because Lindbergh's the Lindbergh child that got murdered and captured from his fame and so forth. There he is with the hoop skirt rocket is what they technically called that. Hoop skirt rocket. There.
Well, they actually called it Nell.
And they called it Nell, yeah. They named, but the generic term was a bunch of rockets like that. It was like a hoop skirt, and there he is with the debris from a rocket there, smiling, just glad we got it back and can check it out. That looks like Massachusetts there.
Yeah.
The background there. That was that. What else you got about Goddard there? So we're gonna move on to this, some shuttle stuff with you.
The some of the first that he built the first turbo pumps and gas generators to pressurize propellants. Earlier, he had used pressurized inert gases like nitrogen, but to get more power, you needed the turbo pumps. He couldn't get anybody interested in making them. So his machine shop had to make them themselves and go through all of the bearings and the materials. He had the first scientific payload where he launched a barometer, a thermometer, and a camera. And that was in 1929. First gyro controlled, first gimbal controlled, first variable thrust rocket engine. He did work for the Navy in World War II, and they were basically for JATO units, jet assisted takeoff. Although they were they were called jet because if you called it rocket, they were actually RATOs, rocket assisted takeoffs, because you were a crazy person if you did rocket research.
New York Times said you were.
Exactly. But they tested it on a PBY, and PBY is like the Catalina seaplane.
Oh, okay.
And they wanted to be able to get them, heavier planes off of the water, and so he basically built liquid propellant JATOs. JPL solved a lot of the solid propellant JATO problems, because whenever you had solid propellants, especially if they were gunpowder, once you built them, they would start to dry out and crack and then, blow up when you lit them, which was why people didn't really like solid propellant rockets. JPL started using asphalt as like a binder and a fuel, and that solved a lot of the solid propellant rockets that eventually became SRBs, polybutyl, rubber.
Mm-hmm.
But Goddard basically did the research that eventually went into the reaction motor uh, rocket company and went into the Bell X-1 rocket engines. And those JATO engines, you could sit there and just slam the throttle and you know up and down on it in the range it had. And they showed it to the Navy, and some of the Navy guys talked about the fact that it was like you were Thor controlling the Thunderbolt.
Really? Huh. Well, we've enjoyed. This is the 18th, but tomorrow, October 19th, was Inspiration Day for the great Robert Goddard. The day that he went up on a cherry tree. How old was he? 17.
17.
And dreamed about going to space. And if he hadn't been ridiculed, if he hadn't been, ostracized, and he really was, and he was very hurt by it. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He wouldn't share his knowledge with any institutions because, like Eric's pointed out, the institutions, were thinking, "Wow, what do we got here?" And we'll end our show here with a little bit more love to Robert Goddard there. So, but I just am in awe of this man, of what he could have done. History is littered with what ifs, and this is one of the biggest what ifs of the rocket world, because his wife filed hundreds of patents, I believe, after he died.
Yeah, he had about 80 during his lifetime, and she went through his papers and did 120 more.
Yeah, 120 there, over 100. So,
but the Germans, Werner von Braun and his team, actually got funding from the Nazi government because they said, Robert Goddard, the Navy's doing something with him when he was working on the JATOs, and they used Goddard's activity to help get them, more funding during World War II.
Died in 1945, folks. So how old was he? He was only like in his late 50s, I believe, of throat cancer. He was a chain smoker, as were lots of people back in that day. So let's see. We got Larry Green saying, okay. Hi, Larry Green. Oh yeah, late Steve saying he wishes he had a copy. Yeah, of Goddard's famous book there. Tom Celentano, yeah, he got the exact person that we're going to celebrate 2 launches. Launched on October 18th, 4 years apart, and Shannon Lucid was on both of those. And 3 of those astronauts went to the Mir space station. We'll talk about that. And Doug Forrest says hi. Great to see you, Doug, in Los Angeles there. Know that you're enjoying the fall fauna here, courtesy of Bill Whiting. All right, let's segue to the great shuttle era and our good friend. This is a shot by Tom Usiak, who's up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, enjoying some colors, I'm sure, up there. Has gotten cooler down here. It was
finally.
Yeah, finally. It was down as low as 53 at my house when I woke up one morning, two mornings ago. STS-34, and the pilot of that, Don Williams, is the commander, and the pilot is one of our best friends at this American Space Museum, Mike McCulley. I'm going to share with you, as I usually do, Eric, a little bit about the artwork of the patches, as we have Don Williams, the commander, Mike McCulley, the pilot, Franklin Cheng Diaz. That was Don's second and last flight, McCulley's only flight, Chang's second of 7, Shannon Lucid, I think this was her second of 4, or I think no, she's got 5 flights, and Ellen Baker, this was her rookie mission. The triangular shape of the STS-34 crew patch represents forward motion, and the entering into new frontiers of science, engineering, and technology. The Galileo spacecraft overlaying the orbiter symbolizes the joining together of both manned and unmanned space programs in order to maximize the capabilities of each. Expansion of our knowledge of the solar system and other worlds, leading to a better understanding of our own planet, is indicated by the sunrise expanding across Earth's horizon. In the distance is Jupiter, a unique and unknown world awaiting arrival of Galileo to help unlock its secrets. And boy, did it did. This is October 18th, 1989. Meanwhile, the space shuttle remains in Earth orbit, continuing to explore the near-Earth environment there. So Galileo was a very tremendous success, despite the main antenna being compromised and not opening up. I think it lasted about 12 years, and they did a kamikaze dive into the Jupiter atmosphere to burn it up. And really a pioneering mission.
And why did they do the kamikaze mission?
Tell us why.
Well, they basically, what did we just do this past Monday? We basically
Launched a spacecraft to
Europa Clipper.
to Jupiter.
They wanted to make sure that Galileo did not at some point impact on any of the moons and contaminate it.
Exactly. You could be as sterile as you want, but you work in the clean is clean, but it seems like something's going to slip through the cracks, these nasty germs or something, right?
Those little rascals are tough.
They're tough. Huh? Well, let's look at the what I wanted to talk about briefly was we have a series of newspaper volumes of each shuttle donated to us years ago by a fan. And this is some of the newspaper clippings. Those of you that are not familiar with newspapers, Marty shows us one once in a while. But it had, there's the crew. McCulley's over there on the left, Don Williams on the right, Chang's in the middle, Baker's in the back, and Lucid, she's on the left there. So Baker was at the bottom during the launch. Danger is too great. Hold Galileo's launch. Danger is too slight to hold Galileo back. The debate on the USA Today and a judge hitting the Galileo launch button. That's right. They took it to court over this little thing called a radiothermal generator. And you're the scientist. Tell us a little about that.
Well, basically, it is a radioactive plutonium source that is hooked to thermocouples that basically make electricity directly from the heat. And so it's basically a nuclear battery.
Nuclear battery, which everyone was freaking out about. There's the little nuclear pellet that went in it. There is a lady, I don't know if you know that lady, you might. She's got a Geiger counter on the exact section of Galileo that had this, and she's not in some lead outfit or something like that. See, McCulley told me that the power of that RTG would barely work a toaster.
Correct.
Okay, correct. Is there a wattage or amperage or something to throw out there?
I don't know the numbers. But
protesters.
It was sufficient to drive the instruments and act as a heat source to keep the spacecraft warm.
And why did they want to do that?
Well, because the solar panels of the time were just not efficient enough. And the solar power at Jupiter and beyond, they needed the RTGs to get a reliable source of power.
Because Jupiter's about 800 million miles away from the sun. We're 93 million miles away, so it's almost 10 times further. The light is almost 20 times fainter there by the inverse square law. And but this Europa mission was launched with some of the largest solar panels.
Right. Well, Juno. The follow-up for Galileo, it was the first one with solar arrays.
Yes.
But the Europa Clipper is like 72 feet wide.
Yeah. And it'll be there in 6 years. It's going to go by Mars and actually go by the Earth, get slingshot over to Jupiter. Takes a lot of energy. You just can't get it off the Earth's rocket and get it there. You need to use some of that energy.
We don't have dilithium crystals and antimatter yet.
No, we don't. You're working on that. Your retirement.
Well,
though,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
Protesters were big news. They chained themselves to the gate. Federal workers to monitor launch radiation from Coco. Disney World was freaking out that if the rocket would blow up, we would all be imperiled. And guess what? Nothing happened. And we taken these RTGs to the moon.
Well, we actually blew up one of the RTGs. I believe it was a Vandenberg launch,
Uh-huh.
and it was, I don't know what the payload was, but it had an RTG on it. And they basically went out, found it in the ocean, brought it back. It was fine because the plutonium is encased in like 5 or 6 layers of zircon and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's
not even Superman can get in it.
And it's subcritical mass. It's not going to blow up, and it's all it does is get hot.
That's the power source there with the fins, the gray fins there. One of the Apollo missions. That kind of looks like not many mountains in the back. Not sure which ones that is, but these powered the Apollo lunar science experiment packages. Some of which are still operating 50 years later. There's the crew. There, Chang Diaz in the middle. There's Mike McCulley on the right. Shannon Lucid, who would be launched 4 years later on this same day. We, of course, love Mike a lot. He is such a great guy. He was born in San Diego. His father was killed in a car accident when he was 8 years old. And he said that the next week he was landing in Nashville, where his mother had a sister living. And he grew up in Livingston, Tennessee, and has done a lot of great things for that community. He only had one flight because he was the first of 7 pilots in his class to fly. He went and asked the chief of the astronaut office, when am I going to fly again? Am I going to be a commander? And the chief said, you're not going to be a commander. And Mike, I got 6 guys to get ahead of you. And he saw the writing on the wall, 3 or 4 years, and then Challenger happened. And no, this was after Challenger, 89. He just didn't want to stick around for 4 or 5 more years to fly again. And he became part of the United Space Alliance.
Yep.
And was your boss, so to speak. And Marty's a very beloved person, wasn't he, in that organization?
Yes, he was.
Yes, he was. He was. He never disciplined you for anything, did he?
No,
Okay,
I never did anything wrong.
Just sure. Yeah, you're just like Marty. I'm the one that does all the bad stuff around here. Now, Mike is just such a great person. He's now 81 years old. There's a picture I took of him a couple years ago at one of our events, and he and his wife Jane are enjoying their retirement. And he frankly he was our speaker at the Astronaut Memorial in January that we always do. And he has said, Mark, I just want to shut it down. I've enjoyed a great life. And he's so appreciative of how his life has been. And when he was the chief operating officer for United Space Alliance, the last contractor that managed all the contractors the last 10 years of the shuttle, he was a hands-on guy. You'd see him on the floor, pop up in places there. And so if it gets out to you, Mike, we love you and wish you continued good health. And you come to Shuttle Fest in April, I'll buy you a beer. Well, let's move on to another fabulous launch that was done in 1993 on October 18th, the STS-58. Eric, this patch, look at that beautiful patch and the colors. This has so many hidden meanings in it, all right? The STS-58 patch shows Columbia in orbit around Earth with a Space Lab module in its payload bay. The Space Lab and the lettering Space Lab Life Sciences 2 highlight the primary mission of the second spaceflight dedicated to life science research. That's the human body, folks. So these astronauts, John Blaha, the commander, Richard Searfoss, the pilot, Rhea Sidden, the mission specialist, Bill MacArthur, David Wolf, Shannon Lucid, and Martin Fettman. 7 of them on there. They were all guinea pigs, sticking needles in each other and cuffs around their hands and legs and everything.
Well, that's what they did to John Glenn, on 95.
Uh-huh.
And that's how he got his second trip into space says, I'm old, you can stick me all you want, but I want to go again.
And he was 77 years old. And of course, this man beside me had something involved in all these launches here. An EDO, Extended Duration Object Support Pallet, is shown in the aft bay. That's the yellow thing, stressing the scheduled 2-week duration of this longest spaceflight mission to date, which was it's over 12 days. Yeah, 13 days it looks like. I love this. The hexagonal shape of the patch depicts the carbon ring, a molecule common to all living organisms. Encircling the inner border of the patch is a double helix of DNA, representing the genetic basis of life. I love that helix in there. The yellow, the red, and but what's the yellow in there? The red and blue is what I'm saying there. What's the yellow? Its yellow background is the color of the sun, the source for all life on Earth. The energy source for all life on Earth. Both medical and veterinary caduci are shown to represent the STS-58 life experiments, left and right. I believe they had something like 28 lab rats on board there. That had
who gave their all.
Yeah, they gave their all. Finally, the position of the spacecraft in orbit about the Earth with the United States in the background symbolizes the ongoing support of the American people for scientific research intended to benefit all mankind. And this patch was designed by the crew.
Oh, they all, the crews, each one designed their own patch.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's an artist involved, but usually, as Eric says, we have found that that's an exercise the commander likes to do in the very beginning. Let's design our patch, and then he kind of sees the personality comes out if he doesn't know him already, of some of his crewmates there. A lot of psychological things among the crewmates, I imagine, Eric, right? To pick them, meld them together, and then keep them cohesive. 3 of these astronauts spent time on the Mir space station. That, of course, would be Shannon Lucid, and she was the Canadian Bondor. She was on the Mir space station. Blaha was the second one to go up, and the last one up there was David Wolf. All 3 of them did not know that at the time that they were going to be on the Mir space station, and so they've got this mission and that in common to talk about. As I looking here. There's the crew there. David Wolf's on the far left. Searfoss is on the right. The ladies, of course, Lucid and Rhea Seddon, married to Hoot Gibson. We've met Bill MacArthur a couple times. He gives a good talk out there, Marty. And Blaha used to, and he's in his 80s and doesn't want to travel too much. And the gentleman standing on the back is Fettman, his one and only flight there. Beautiful launch by our buddy Tommy Usiak and his crew. Beautiful Hasselblad camera there. There's the shuttle patch, just to remind me to talk about, if I forgot about, that those astronauts were on there. Gary Gerald knows that. Good to see you, Gary, on Stay Curious today. There is the Mir space station. Look at that with the shuttle attached to it. That's one of my very favorite pictures of the shuttle era. I mean, look at how big the shuttle is compared to that lower right-hand corner. And just, it was longer than the whole section of 2 buses, one way and 2 bus links sort of the other way, that was the Mir space station. What a conglomeration there. But we learned a lot, and this relationship continues today, all right, on the International Space Station, with Russians and Americans up there right now. And ending the shuttle talk of the day here, what a shot. What a photograph taken by an astronaut looking out the window flying a T-38, no doubt, on there. Marty and you are both under those clouds somewhere down there, looking up as a T-38's looking down there. And Eric, we can't talk enough about what you great shuttle workers have done for our society, because I truly believe we wouldn't have the society we have today if it wasn't for the accomplishments in science, engineering, arts, math, whatever you want to talk about.
And it's all thanks to Robert Goddard.
It is. There you go. As we say, answer Marty's trivia question of the day. And that is again, Marty?
Well, nobody seems to have answered the question.
Well, one, Steve Jokums asked Jose Hernandez.
I don't know if he was answering that from. Well, okay. I don't know if he's answering your question or my question.
No, he's answering your question, I believe. What
No.
astronaut?
No, it definitely wasn't Steve.
What was my question?
It wasn't Jose. But George Abbey called Anna Fisher to let her know that she's been accepted as an astronaut. And then George said, if Bill's there, let me talk to him. So she handed her phone over to her husband, and George notified him that he was not accepted. Eventually he was, though.
So
So it was
Abby
Bill Fisher.
told Rhea Seddon she was one of the 6, and then asked to hear her husband, Hoot Gibson. Huh?
Oh, man, I'm sorry.
And Hoot, he said, Hoot, sorry, apply again next time. Wow, that's a good one, Marty. I like that a lot on there. Cool. Hello, Doug Forrest. Yeah, that was Steve's assumption there, I think. Anyway, yes, it's all because of this man here, the great Robert Goddard. And as you all that watch Stay Curious a lot know, we and Marty and I hardly miss a chance to talk about him. And there's a Goddard Space Flight Center. I mean, he's immortalized for sure. There he stands in front of what they called the A series rocket there, in all of its glory there. Now he's got fins on his rocket, for stabilization. Were they that necessary?
Well, they didn't do enough. That's why he had to have the gyroscopes and he had to have the vanes in, because in order for the fins to really do enough, they would have to be enormous and then they'd get too big.
Mm-hmm.
So because of the changing, just like this afternoon or this evening, they're saying 40% go for weather, winds aloft.
Mm-hmm.
And he was always thrilled. Goddard was always thrilled when he could see as the rocket went up, as it corrected itself, as it, the winds blew it to one side and it was able to steer itself with gyroscopic control.
He actually put a camera and a barometer, and what else you say he put on one?
Thermometer.
Or thermometer. I wonder what kind of camera that was there, Tom Usiak. The film had to be like 25 ISO. Yeah. It was a Brownie camera somehow reenacted on there. And it all started 125 years ago tomorrow, 1899, October 19th, when Goddard climbed a cherry tree like this one and started dreaming. And boy, are we glad about that. So thanks a lot, Eric. Yep. Do you have any final comments you want to say?
No, just we had a good rocket launch on Monday.
Yeah.
And
3 rockets tied together.
And then, of course, if you all saw the SpaceX Super Heavy on the weekend.
Oh yeah.
Where they grabbed the booster for the
What'd you think of as an engineer?
That's the power of really good computers.
That's a good point, my friend. And they put it on pegs. It just wasn't laying there.
Yeah.
And Musk said, what do you call that? VR? What's the radar that y'all would be used to hone in on that, or what kind of computers you're talking about there? Because Musk said the next one will have a 1 centimeter tolerance.
Yeah.
1 centimeter. Wow. In there. So, well, thank you a lot, Eric.
Processing power.
Steve Jokum says, thanks for the great puzzler, Marty. you got him. Okay, so Steve, he thought he'd never get you on anything. Okay, but we're appreciative to Steve Jokums and Lake County Spaceport. Steve, after this, I'm going to be seeing the sprint race at Austin, as he and I are both F1 fans, and the greatest drivers and the most complex vehicles on the face of Earth are in Austin this weekend to race there. So looking forward to that. So Gary Gerald, hope you're doing good, my friend. He's up in Georgia planting those delicious, planting seeds for those delicious Vidalia onions for us. So anyway, Marty, thank you very much. We want to thank John Graham for being in here and looking over your shoulder. Hope we haven't scared him off of helping us there, Marty. But you've got a final comment, Marty, or you want to brag about stumping Steve Jokums?
No comment.
Okay. Well, we hope everyone enjoys a great fall weekend, is safe and sound. The tragedies of the hurricanes Helene and Milton are still being felt through my friends up in Southwest Virginia and Northeast Tennessee in the Asheville area, where Marty's son, one of his sons, lives up there. So you all want to keep them in your thoughts. We hope that you all find your way to like us, share us, and tell your friends about us, as we had today another interesting program that I don't think anybody else has asked Eric Baker to come on and talk lately. And we'll have Eric on again, as he'll come up and say, Mark, I want to talk about this aspect of the shuttle or something. And we welcome that with all of our great guests that are just supporting our museum in such a tremendous way, bringing us some programming that we don't think you get anywhere else. And we've got, thank you for your time, guys. That's GTH042, wishing both a pleasant weekend from North Carolina. Yes, I didn't promise. I said I would make a comment. And then I forgot about having Eric doing this program. So I'm going to make a comet Monday and get outside. It's about third magnitude, this comet, but there's a lot of great pictures of it. You, with your smartphone, can take a camera photo of it if you hold it very steady. And we will look at some pretty pictures of this comet. Not the comet of the century, not even as good as Comet Neowise a couple years ago, but nonetheless, it's out there, and no one's going to see it again for another 80,000 years.
Well,
So
don't put it on your calendar.
don't put it on your calendar. So thanks again, Eric Baker, for being a great docent and guest here at the American Space Museum. Until next week, on behalf of Marty and our whole staff here at the American Space Museum, I'm Mark Marquette saying we can't wait to see you in our museum to bridge the space between us.